Hi, thanks for joining the webinar today on Fastman's Bulk Data Manager. I'm Simon Harvey and I'll be your host for the session today. Just a quick bit of logistics before we kick things off. The webinar itself will take about 45 minutes or so. We'll do about 35 minutes, something like that, of general presentation. And then we'll do a Q&A after the session itself, which will take 10 minutes or whatever time we have remaining in there. In terms of questions, if you want to ask any questions as we're going through, you'll find a panel called the questions box in the GoToMeeting sidebar in there. So feel free to just jot them into there and send them through as the meeting session goes on, and we'll pick all those up and answer them at the end. So without further ado, that's about it from my introduction. Let me introduce you to today's presenter. I'm sure many of you already know Alistair, so I'll keep this pretty short. For those that don't, Alistair Grigg's the CEO at Fastman, and he's been working with open text content server tools, solutions and content server clients for well over the last decade. In today's session, we're going to take a closer look at ways for managing content and metadata within the content server platform. In particular, Alistair's going to be looking at the Fastman Bulk Data Manager solution. So with that, I'd like to hand things over and I'll chat with you again later in the call. So over to you, take it away, Alistair.
Thank you, Simon, and welcome everybody. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. As Simon said, we're going to run through a little bit of an overview and introduction to our Bulk Data Manager tool and talk about some use cases and a bit of experience we've had with the product over the last few years. We haven't done one of these webinars for this product for a little while, so some of you might not be familiar with some of the newer features and some of the support that's available for the newer versions of Content Server in the current product. So we'll talk about that as we go. And as Simon said, if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat or to the Q&A session, and we'll get to them at the end. Oops, there we go. Had a problem with my mouse buttons not working properly. Bulk Data Manager, what is it, and why have we got this conversation? Probably one of the most common conversations you have with customers around Content Server is the concept, the challenge of data migration and managing data inside Content Server itself. So ironically, one of the great things about, or one of the amazing features about Content Server as a product is that it's designed to process and manage large volumes of content. That's what it's for. Apply governance, apply control, provide single source of truth, all those good things. But out of the box, the product itself provides limited tools to do it effectively. You can add items, you can edit items, you can all the business processes that go with it. You can apply retention schedules, all that type of stuff. But the moment you want to be able to import gigabytes of data or thousands of items, hundreds of thousands of items, the moment you want to make a bulk change to the retention schedules of a lot of records, change the properties of some physical objects, change metadata, then you come up against a bit of a hurdle. Bulk Data Manager has been around for a while, and it's used when this is when you have this type of challenge, when you want to, as I just mentioned, add versions of many files, schedule processes after hours. This is the challenges you have with managing data inside Content Server itself. Common problems that people come up with this scenario is we pass the problem back to the users. As an IT group, if traditionally this is what's happened, a lot of the times people will turn around and say, well, that's really more of a business problem, but obviously it's not. But people do that. They'll say pass it back to the business users and you sort it out, or you have to deal with what the functionality that's available out of the box. It doesn't have to be that way. Other organizations will turn around and say, well, we'll pass it back to the system administrators. So the system admins have got to run scripts, they've got to write code, they've got to use Object Importer, which is the go-to product, obviously, but that needs skills, that needs technical skills, and it needs multiple people involved just to achieve some simple outcomes. You could use extract import type tools, the object exporter, run it through some CSV files, make some changes, run it through an object importer, apply the changes. But the problem with that traditionally is that it disconnects the data and the process. So the two things operate in isolation. The business knowledge is not applied to the content in place, and you again need multiple people to do what is effectively a should be a simple, straightforward task. And again, we come up with the dilemma of the product, the platform itself, not providing those capabilities out of the box. And turning around the other way, when you say to people, well, management might turn around and say, well, it's just noise. You're going to have to live with it. And the end result of all of that is typically that the system doesn't get used. So you might have a small number of people in an organization using Content Server or Content Suite, but what you want, of course, with a product like Content Server, is you want it used across the enterprise, across the organization. So you want to get information out of those file shares and put it into the Content Server, and you want to do it in a way which is compliant with or consistent with your regulatory obligations, with your policies, and you do it and you want to do it in a way that doesn't cost too much money and time. Some people will just blame the software and basically say we've got a problem. The software itself is good. The product itself does the job it's supposed to do, and it does it in a very, very good way. And Content Server, Content Suite scales extremely well. So the answer that it doesn't do this already, there are ways and means of doing it. Now, again, I talk about separating process from data. As we go through this, you'll see this theme coming through more and more. But management will also, through a response such as we've just talked about, will separate the data from the controls. So whilst you might have people who understand about compliance, understand about the need to have governance and control around a number of things to do with content, those people in the end actually aren't the people who are going to be doing the work to migrate the data into the system. So again, you're separating data from controls, you're separating process from the data, and sometimes people blame the software and even just ignore the problem. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way at all. Bulk Data Manager has been around for a little while, but the question that always comes up in these sessions, does it support the current versions? Yes, it supports all the way up to 16.2, so there's no problem there at all in terms of technical fit, but it's been around for a while, and it remains, I believe, the most flexible data migration transformation solution for Content Server itself. And it simplifies the process. It simplifies the process of updating and adding and migrating content into Content Server and within Content Server. And it does it in such a way that it reduces a lot of the double handling and the administrative. It's a user-driven, or it can be a user-driven solution. It can also be an administrator, an IT or project team tool for mass migrations and so on and so forth. So it simplifies it and makes it more flexible and more user-friendly. So what does it give you, and what is it? It's a set of administrative tools. So it's designed to be available for business process, so repeatable process. Its origins originally came from a engineering document control world, but has progressively developed over the years until the point where it's a general set of tools for both administrators, and I should update the slide, for end users. It allows users to do these things themselves without having to pick up the phone, without having to send emails, make requests to IT. It enables the users to do these load, update, and manage functions themselves. It also works hand in hand with Content Server itself. So whilst it's a fully developed and rich application, it doesn't do it in isolation. So we're not pulling data out of Content Server, putting it into a spreadsheet, having people work offline, not knowing what's going on with the data whilst they're doing this. It's connected to the system. So you're pulling information such as record schedules, such as metadata, and so on. You're working with it real time through the tool, talking to Content Server through web services. It also allows you to comply, or ensures you comply with underlying rules around access. So if you can't see something, if you can't edit it, or you can't delete, you can't do any of those things through Bulk Data Manager. So those rules still apply, and it also allows you to put extra rules on top. So you can apply say these are the sorts of metadata that these users are allowed to access. You can put extra rules on top around mandatory use of metadata and so on and so forth. And those things can be controlled centrally. So we're not losing control. We're not waving our hands up in the air and saying, okay, business, you can do whatever you like with the system. Basically, we say these are the policies, these are the rules that apply to the data coming into and managed by our system. But the specific users are allowed to be able to work with that data from their own desktops and PCs. And it is flexible. Well, we built this product to be flexible to suit business process and business need. It's a modular product, so if you've got custom requirements around business process, we can modify the product to suit, and a number of our customers have got that and have been using that successfully for a number of years now. So let's talk about what it does, and I'm going to jump into a demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a demo, show you how it works, and then I'll go through and we'll talk about some of the functionality we've seen, and then we'll jump into some Q&A. One of the things I would like to do up front, if it's all right with you, is I would just like to run a quick poll and see how many people are actually using which versions of Content Server. So I'm going to run a poll now. You should get a little pop-up window on your screen, and I'll give you a minute or so or 30 seconds or so to respond. And if you can just click one of the items, and then we'll give you the results of that straight away. So let's run that now. So we're just running that as we go. So you should get a screen. Thank you very much. We're getting quite a few responses already. With most people, 57% of the people on the call have got Content Server 16 plus, which is very encouraging, I have to say. So just wait a second more for those responses to close, and I'll close that now. So it's actually ended up at 50-50. So for those of you who are interested, we've had a 50-50 split between Content Suite 10.5 and Content Suite 16 plus. So that's actually quite interesting. Okay, so let's move on. Thank you for that. Let's move on now and have a look at the functionality that the product itself gives us, and jump straight into the demo. So the product is modular, I mentioned before. The 6 modules that it comes with out of the box, some of these are more commonly used than others, but I should mention that each one of these modules is designed for a particular purpose, and the reason that they are modular is so that we can change and adapt and modify them to suit a customer's requirements or an organization's requirements, but they work perfectly well out of the box. And I mentioned before, we've got people running the product in a customized form. We've also got a lot of customers running it straight out of the box, working perfectly well. So it's designed to be modular and can be modified, but it also means that we can run it through a wizard process, so we can help the user. So another key factor or key consideration in the design of the product is to help the end user. So we don't demand that the user has a lot of knowledge about the technical aspects of the system. We're providing them with a wizard-based interface so they can just click the buttons and follow the bouncing ball and add the details as they go along. And part of the reason we can do that is because we do break it down into these modules. Each module is designed to do a certain thing. Generally, there are 2 versions of the product that people will buy. People will buy the complete suite, so you'll see all 6 of these items. Or people will buy the low taxonomy version, which is an off-the-shelf bundle of the product, and it's really designed for people who just want to do migration of data from their file shares or from another source. But you can add modules as you want. You can do a custom version with a mixture of these modules. If you are doing migrations, the ones that I suggest are included are load taxonomy and load versions and update attributes. Those 3 basically give you most of the things you want to do in a general document migration and document management scenario. But it is configurable. So let's jump into a demo now and show you what it looks like. I'm going to be operating connected to our content server system. I've got a little demo system here. This is a 10.5 system, but functionally it's exactly the same as a CS16 environment. So you can treat it as exactly the same. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work from an empty folder. You should be able to see a folder here in Content Server. At the moment that folder is empty. There's no content in it. I am logged on as the admin, so I have full rights. So I'm actually got no limitations in terms of what I can and can't do. I mentioned before that if you wanted to configure it so that certain people can only add certain types of content or use certain categories, we can do all that. We can set up profiles. I'm not going to show you every piece of functionality here. I'm just going to show you bits and pieces. And give you an overview, and later on, if you've got some questions or so on, you can come back to us and we can answer them at the end. And certainly we can do a more detailed demo if you want. Okay, so let's get some data into the system. Let's assume that I'm a business user. I'm out in whatever business unit you want, or I'm a system admin, and I want to load some content into the system. I'm just wanting to migrate. Now remember, traditionally with this, you'd have to write scripts, you'd run object importer and so on and so forth. And frankly, if you're an administrator or a technical person, that's perfectly fine. But if you don't want to learn XML and you don't want to become a programmer, you want to remain as a project document controller or an accountant or whatever it might be that you want to do, then this is going to allow you to do that. So I'm going to run a process called load taxonomy, and load taxonomy, as I mentioned, is one of our modules. You can see at this moment I'm connected to one system. I could be connected to multiple systems if I wanted to, and I could also have different profiles. So profiles are where you define which metadata and which records management schedules you give people access to, and some of the other configuration options that we might set up. So in this case, I'm just running a straightforward base level document migration. I'm going to follow the bouncing ball, and if you follow me through, and if you think about how much time I actually spend on each stage, and take away all the talk that goes on when you're doing a demo, you'll get to see how simple and straightforward it is. In this case, I'm going to start from a new piece of work. So I'm not going to start from something I've saved. I could. You can save it halfway through and then come back to it later on, and we can talk about that in some detail if you're interested. So I'm going to start from new, click the button, the bouncing ball. Here's my bouncing balls at the top. Now it says, okay, I want to select a folder, so I'm basically just going to tell it where I want the data to come from. And in this case, it now navigates me to my browser, to my file explorer, and I come down and I find the files that I want to bring in, and you can see in this structure that there are documents and content underneath it. Inside each one of these folders, there are a number of documents. This structure has got 110 megabytes. I think it's 27 or 29 files. All I need to do is select the top folder. I don't need to worry about the folder structure underneath it. I just need to select the top folder, and I say OK. So now it knows where the documents have got to come from. I click Next, and now it's going to go out to the content server. So it's talking to this EW 2014 AG instance of content server, and it's telling me that this is the structure that it's seen, and it's asking me where to tell it to put the folders. So I'm going to put it in the bulk data manager demo folder, and I could select other folders from other places based on history, recent locations. I'm just going to select the bulk data manager demo. So next. Now, so I've told it where to get the documents from. I've told it where to put the documents and build the structure. Now I'm going to tell it what metadata I want it to apply. So I'm just going to select the one category. Again, goes back to the profile. So I could have told it to select other categories from the categories volume. In this case, I'm just going to ask it to select the document control category. Now, just mention quickly as we pass, but if I wanted it to bring in the last modified and the create date and also the owner, I could do that quite happily. In fact, I am going to use the owner, but I could happily bring in the last modified and the create dates through the file system attributes function. And it actually does it out of the box, but the attributes function allows me to keep it as a historical metadata value. So all I'm doing now is I'm just going to go through and say these are some default values that I'm going to apply to the content. These 20 or 30 odd files, and this again is coming directly from content server. It's telling me that these are the values these are the attributes, the values that are valid for these attributes that we're using. So next, and that could be that could be 3 or 4 different categories if you wanted it to be, and you can set default values for that if you want. in through the configurations, the profiles. You can set defaults and enforce mandatory values as well. So now what it's doing is it's saying, okay, you've said to me that you want in configuration that you want to apply records management retention. So now this is my classifications that I've got available. So I'm going to select the legal services, minor public interest or controversy, and I just picked up before that this has got a spelling mistake in the RSIs. It's really good. So next. So I've done all the setting up. I've told it what I want to do, and now it's giving me a screen, basically a grid. It looks and feels like Excel. It operates like Excel, but it actually isn't Excel. It's a control sitting inside the application. And now it's telling me that it's going to build a folder structure underneath the target location. It's going to build me at folder 1 level. It's going to build me 2014 conference presentations. It's going to build me another level 2 below that, and then it's going to put the documents in. It's going to pick the document names off the file share. It's going to add a node description based on the default that I gave it, and it's going to set the owner. Now it's picked it up off the last modified person in the file share, so I could change this, and I will, for these two at the top. I could change that to what I know is a valid content server username, which is me. If I just typed a little bit slower, I'd be able to get it right first time. And I'll drag and drop that. So those 3 items, in fact, I'll do it all the way through to the end of the case studies items. And you can see that, so for the breakouts and case study folder, those items are now going to be owned by Alistair Grigg, the content server user, Alistair Grigg. For all the others, where there is no direct match between the file share and the content server environment, it's going to default to the user that's running the process, in this case, the admin user. For the last 2 down the bottom, it's going to pick up this user S. Crocker. So we'll have a look at that once the documents have been imported. If I wanted to go through and change this value in a particular attribute, there was no controls, I could just do a type at the top. If I wanted to undo that, I could undo it. If I wanted to change it on 1 or 2 items, I could select those items, and at this point it says not responding. Always love that when you're doing a demo. It talks to me and says, no, I can't do that. I'm not too sure why it's doing that. It's woken up now. So I could drag and drop that for 2 or 3 items. For an attribute, for example, and remember I'm skipping through this fairly quickly, for an attribute which has predefined values by the category definition, it will give you a list of valid attributes, and it will allow you again to drag and drop. So if I wanted to change these from Gladstone to Toronto to Norway, for example, I could do that. If I said, no, I actually made a mistake in my defaults, I'm actually going to make these Papua New Guinea. So this is all to do with the PNG project, so nothing to do with the previous one. So I can do all that, and again, same thing with the records number, the records management file number. If I know that that's not exactly the one that I want, I could put in another classification, and it knows what that is, and it would put it back in there for you. I'm just going to leave it 10.1.2 so that we save a bit of screen real estate here. Once that's finished, I'm happy. Now I could save that and get someone to validate it, send it off to them as an Excel spreadsheet and restart, but I'm just going to finish. And at this point, I could either do it now or I could schedule it to run overnight. So if you've got a lot of content to bring in, you could run 20, 30, 40, 1,000 items at a time, and run one at 6 o'clock, one run at 7, one at 8, one at 9. So it's got a scheduling function in there as well. So that's kind of important if you don't want to load your system up during the day. And that's it. And now if you think about, again, what I mentioned at the start, take out the talk time, just look at the doing time. It only took me a minute or so, probably a minute and a half to set this up and have it run. And now I just sit back and watch it happen. So it's running an import, it's bringing the files into the system, it's creating the taxonomy, it's applying the categories and attributes, and it's also applying records management retention to those documents. It's brought in 25 documents. It's seen 4 errors, which we've got a log of. We can go back and review. It's taken just under a second per document to do that. So that process is completed. And as I said, it's kept a log. So this log is available anytime you want to. You can go back and check out the content whenever you want. If I go back to my content server environment, you can see now that I've got a folder structure. Before it was empty. And for those of you who are familiar with our Permissions Manager product, I'm going to use Permissions Manager because it's got a very nice little tree view. For those of you who are not familiar with it, be aware that when we sell Bulk Data Manager, if it's sold in conjunction with Permissions Manager, there is a bundle available. So please, if you're interested in that, talk to us, because we were able to do that as a bundle. Going back to the demo, you can see the structure is here. I'll expand the conference presentations, I'll expand the breakouts, and you can see here, for example, that now that folder exists. It didn't exist before. The records management details have been, or records management has been applied to the documents. Now, a question that I often get is inheritance. If you had records management applied to a folder and you were building content under that folder and inheritance was set up, yes, it would inherit the RM classifications as you go. It would do that. In this case, there wasn't, so it's putting it onto the documents only. You can see that Alistair Grigg is the owner, and you can also see that if I go into the properties and the categories, you can see that it's got the categories with the values that we defined. So, and again, it's using exactly the same categories that or definitions that we would use if we were doing this through Enterprise Connect or doing it through the web interface or any other method that you might want to use to add content. And if I scroll down a little bit further and I expand the Fastman templates folder, you can see that that's owned by Sam Crocker again, and pretty straightforward, very simple. All the audit details are all included. It's inherited the permissions, all that sort of thing. If you did want to modify permissions at this point, obviously you'd use Permissions Manager to do that. And the two products work hand in hand and very tightly. So the one thing I was going to show you before we jump out of demo is I'm going to go back to the product and I will show you how we can use the update attributes and talk about a couple of the other modules just briefly so you get a feel for them, and then we'll jump into Q&A. So I'll just close down that dialog from the load taxonomy, and let's assume a slightly different scenario. Let's assume I'm doing a migration and I've got a group out there that's still working on documents, and they've got 100,000, 200,000 documents that they've sorted through, and you've migrated them to Content Server, but they've said, well, we're still actively working on 5,000 of these, and they're all over the place. All you need to do at that point is we run what we call load versions. So you run load versions. It's very similar. Once you've run one of these systems, you know it it's basically the same dialogue. So I follow the bouncing ball, I select the files, and basically say to them, when you're ready to add those files to the system, and you want us to add their versions, just put them into a folder structure and dump the latest version into this folder. And we don't really care, if you've got 10 other versions sitting somewhere else, just put those into this location, and we'll go through and we'll select them. I can select them all. In this case, I'll just select the smallish number. And what it'll do is we can then point this tool at the top level of the taxonomy that we've migrated the content into, and it will find the files that we're bringing in new versions for. No matter where they are in that structure, it will traverse through the structure, find those, and it'll then give you the ability to be able to update metadata if you want on the files, or just retain the existing metadata records retention as shown from the Content Server system. So it's really, really handy for a data migration scenario. So I'm just going to say to this, look at the Bulk Data Manager demo, go next, find those files, and it's now traversing through the Bulk Data Manager demo structure, and it's come back and it said, well, I've found a number of files, the ones in green, and the ones in red I can't find. Well, sorry, when I use the term I mean BDM, the tool, can't find. I can export that, send it back to the people and say, well, you've said it, you've got a new version. In actual fact, the original version doesn't exist, you've got to migrate that in. But if I want that, I just run next, and next, again, bouncing ball. And if I want to update metadata at this point, I can. So these documents, I've decided that these are actually not to do with PNG, they're back to Gladstone again, and I will then finish that again. Oops, and then it's picked up an error with the records management details. So again, I'm jumping through things fairly quickly, but essentially it's helping us as we go, rather than waiting for us to do an import and let it run and look at the results after the import's run. It's trying to do as much as it possibly can up front, so that you get these errors before you actually submit the process. So finish, fix the problem, and now it's going away and doing it. So it's only got 12 items, so it won't take very long. And I'll very quickly show you the update attributes function, so you can see how you can use search, and you can use select functions to find content to modify. So I've updated 12. I've added new versions to 12. Let's go back to my environment here, my demo environment, and I'll open up the folder structure, and you can see there's a new version added. And if I open up the properties and look at the versions, you can see the versions are there. If I look at the categories for the original one, you can see that will have the Papua New Guinea project, but if I open up the properties for the current one, it will have the Gladstone properties. So it's done the modifications, added the new version, and updated the metadata as I go. It's very simple, very straightforward, and again, it's trying to help people rather than hinder people. Very quickly before I hand back to Simon, so we can do Q&A, you can see that the update attributes is probably about a 10 or 15 minute discussion in itself. But again, you follow the same bouncing ball. The primary difference here is that you now have the ability to browse and select content. You can go to a particular part of content server and say, I want to update these documents in this location and this metadata. Or you can use search functions. I won't execute a search, it takes a second or two to explain, but you can say, for example, I want to do a free text search for items that contain certain strings, or I want to search for items that have certain categories or classifications, RM attributes, and so on. When I've done that search, I just want to return that list and work with that list. So I can, again, it's talking to content server, it's real time, it's connected to the system. You can save all this offline, send it back to another user to verify. But just if you browse and select, for example, and I go to the same content we just imported, I could select all of that and just select the top level, and it would cascade through it and say, okay, you want all of this content, you want to make a change to it. Again, bouncing ball. You can add it to a collection if you want to use it with transmittals later on, or you want to modify permissions on it. You can add a collection and use Permissions Manager to modify those permissions. And again, it's the same sort of dialogue with some extra features around, what's valid and what's not valid, what's actually applied to the documents already and what's not applied to documents already. You can actually build up quite a complex query here, going backwards and forwards to the previous screen, and through that process, you can end up with it, say, for example, update a certain category where it's not applied to certain types of documents, copy it from one document to another, and so on and so forth. So very, very comprehensive and quite flexible. And I'm just looking at the clock, and I'm very, very aware that we're running out of time. So I'm going to hand back to Simon now, and see if we've got any Q&A process.